Because where you come from is imperative as it relates to where you are going. The root of the tree is more important than the fruit of the tree. So we got to deal with the root. Where does Jesus come from? God says, I'm not going to show you miracles. I'm not going to talk about the sign. Let me show you where he comes from. And then all of a sudden the writer begins. Genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, and he goes on and he goes on. And he gives you the lineage, he gives you the family tree, and he gives you where Jesus comes from. And then he turns and he makes a very interesting observation, and I don't have time at this presentation. He says, so all the generations from David, from Abraham to David are 14. Right, let's count. 14. And from David unto the captivity of Babylon is another 14. Are we together? Are we together? That's what? 28. He says then, from the captivity of Babylon unto Christ is another 14. So he's trying to show us that Jesus did not just arrive. He did not just come haphazardly. He did not just appear all of a sudden. The reason why Jesus is focused, the reason why Jesus is committed, the reason why Jesus is able to fulfill the prophecies and the word of God that has been given to him is because the God that called him is a multi-generational God. From Abraham to David, 14 generations. From David to Babylon, 14 generations. After Babylon, God counts 1 generation, 5 generation, 10 generation, 13 generation, 14 generation. And all of a sudden he pulls Jesus. Why? Because he's a multi-generational God. Everything that God does, he does generationally. God will never start something without including the generations. Where did this thing start? Well, I'll tell you where it started. It started with a man by the name of Abraham. Yes, Abraham. Abraham. Everybody says Abraham. God called Abraham and said to him, get out of your country, your kinfolk, your family house, and I'll show you, take you to a land that I'm going to give to you in blessings. I will bless you multiplying. I will multiply you, bless those that bless you, curse those that curse you, and through your seed will all the nations of the earth be blessed. When God gave Jesus, when God gave Abraham, rather, this promise, it was a multi-generational promise. God knew that the promise and the word that he gave was not a word, nor a promise, nor a prophecy that would be fulfilled in Abraham's life. So what does God do? He released the word. He dispatched the word. He sends the word. But what God does is something powerful, is something stupendous, is something worth noting, because God immediately said, well, I've got to do something in order to guarantee succession. So from the loins of Abraham, God, boom, he pulled Isaac. From the loins of Isaac, boom, he pulled Jacob. Then God continued to work his miracles. From the loins of Jacob, he calls Reuben. First, boom, he pulls Reuben. Then he pulls Levi. Boom, he pulls Levi. Then he pulls Issachar. Then he pulls Benjamin. Then he pulls Naphtali. Then he pulls Asher. Then he pulls Simeon. Then he pulls Judah. Then he pulls Zebulun. Then he pulls Dan. Lastly, he pulls Gad. 12 children. Why? Because the work that I'm starting today with Abraham is not going to die with Abraham. It is going to transition him. The work that I'm starting today is not going to end with Abraham. When Abraham closes his eyes in death, he has to hand over the baton to Isaac. When Isaac close his eyes in death, he's got to hand over the baton to Jacob. From the loins of Jacob, I gotta pull 12 children quickly. Why? Because I'm a multi-generational God. The prophecy that God gave you 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago is a prophecy that includes your children. God that you serve is not just a present day God, but he's a multi-generational God. The promise of God's salvation, the promise of God's protection, the promise of God's provision, the promise of the hand of God in order to bless and to establish and to allow you to experience the good of the Lord in the land of the living. It's a multi-generational God. When God called Bishop Benjamin Dube, he called him and gave him multi-generational responsibility. That's why everything he does has to be multi-generational. The church that he has, multi-generational. The training programs that's being developed, multi-generational. The choir that has been trained, people playing on the keyboard, multi-generational. I know how many people have come through your hands. So when I look at the summer awards and they honored you and they gave you the lifetime achievement award, they were 10 years too late, because that they were supposed to do long time ago. Because in your heart and in your design and in your mission and in your strategy, you've groomed them, they left you. You trained them, they left you. You empowered them, they left you. You gave them a stage, they walked away without recognizing that you were the one, the Father that gave opportunity. But your heart could not get weak and you would not turn a blind eye. Why? Because you are a multi-generational man. You took them when they knew nothing. You made them something. You gave them a name. You gave them visibility, notoriety. Here they are today, standing and singing in their own spotlight. Why? Because you are a multi-generational gift. Many of the children that's singing on the different stages out there, they come through your hands. And the reason why you could do that, and the reason why you wouldn't grow weak, and the reason why you wouldn't faint is because you understand when God separated you, called you from your mother's womb and set you aside, it was to allow you to become a multi-generational leader. But we cannot have a multi-generational leader in the absence of a multi-generationally minded people. Or must I go and sit now? Must I go and sit now? Your leader has stood the test of time. He has gone through hell and high water and hasn't given God his resignation. In the midst of the scars, in the midst of the bleeding, in the midst of everything that happened, the betrayal, the denial, as we go through cycles and seasons in life, there were many people that walked away, but in the midst of it all, he stood standing, he stood writing, he stood declaring the praises of God. I watched him, looked at him as he would go into the presence of God and sing, in his presence. In his presence, Lord, I want to be. This is a wounded soul. This is a soul that people is expecting to crack and to give up. But he's in his presence. In his presence, Lord, I want to be. Why? It's a multi-generational leader. It's a leader that will not give up. It's a leader that will not quit. It's a leader that will not retreat. It's a leader that's not going to turn his back and leave you on the battlefield bleeding. I'll worship him. Lord, broken, but I'll worship, I'll preach, I'll pray, I'll prophesy, I'll write songs. I will do what God has called me to do. Why? Because there is the next generation that's standing behind me. I got to be strong for their sake. I got to show my boys, you don't quit, you don't surrender, you don't retreat. If the devil throw his best punch at you, you take that punch and you get up and you say, in his presence, in his presence, Lord, I want to be in his presence, in his presence, in his presence, Lord, I want to be in his presence. I gotta show the next generation when the battle is intense and blood is oozing out of your wounds. Just bow down, worship before the presence of God, because he understands that what he does today will affect his children tomorrow. In his presence, in his presence, Lord, I want to be in the midst of my pain, in the midst of the generation, in the midst of the agony, the suffering, and the shame. There's a generation. They are following me. They are looking at my faith. They are looking at my commitment. They are looking at my tenacity. They are looking at how I walk before the presence of God. And if I fail God, they will fail God. If I deny God, they will deny God. If I stop preaching, they will stop preaching. But if I keep saying, in his presence, in his presence, Lord, when the next generation come, they say, we saw how Papa did it, we saw how Mama did it, we saw how our grandparents did it. They never denied God in the midst of the danger, in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the obstacles. They went right through water, through fire, through danger, through tribulation. They kept right on preaching Jesus, loving Jesus, preaching the gospel, writing songs, producing albums. Why? Because it's a multi-generational God that has called them. Kamanda da bo shanda de boko, kela la manda da bo se kamanda da bo sha, kela la manda da bo kutandele ke mena, libatando riake, lesando lo boko tataria kana, nandele sela makaya ya manda da bo sha, ribe sanda da bakata, ribe shando resanda baka. Come on, somebody bless him, just bless him, just bless him where you are sitting, just bless him. Kanamanda la bo sandaria kanamanda la bo sha, oh ratatata, yes ando konamanda la bo sha, rebe sandara bakata, lebo shandara baka. You got to be strong for your children's sake. You've got to be faithful for your children's sake. You got to walk with God for your children's sake. You can't quit, you can't surrender, you can't retreat for your children's sake. You cannot jump from church to church for your children's sake. In his presence, in his presence, Lord, I want to be in his presence. in his presence. Lord, I want to be bleeding, but I want to be there. I'm tired, but I want to be there. It's been a bad day, but I want to be there. It's been a bad month, but I want to be there. It's been a bad year, but I want to be there. The newspapers are telling on me, but I want to be there, because there's a generation that's looking up to me in his presence. In his presence. Lord, I want to be. Will you stand with me, please? I don't have. The Spirit of God is here. Everybody stand in his presence. Kana mandada bo sanda da bakata taria kona mandada bo she lekele mandada bo kota taria kana mandada bo rie mandada bo she rimandada bakata tata yes on the bo kota